It started with an empty mailbox. A few catalogs, the usual grocery coupons, a political flyer curled at the corner from the rain, but no invitation. I stood there a moment longer than necessary, the flaps still open, as if maybe something had slipped down or gotten stuck between the metal seams. It hadn't. I closed it slowly, fingers lingering on the cold edge, and walked back up the drive. I had seen the post earlier that morning. Jessica had uploaded a carousel of pastel mock-ups on her Instagram. The baby shower theme was boho bloom, all dusky pinks and eucalyptus greens, with a delicate gold-foiled script that read a little wildflower is on the way. The comment section was already buzzing, friends tagging friends, RSV peeing with heart emojis, people offering to bring macarons or photo backdrops or hand-dyed swaddles. I refreshed the page more times than I cared to admit. My name wasn't there. Not in the tags, not in the replies. At first I gave her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she sent physical invitations only. Maybe she forgot to update the list. These things happen. I reminded myself of that while I folded laundry, while I stirred lentils for dinner, while I stood staring too long at the guest towels in the hallway closet. But something inside me didn't believe that Jessica has never been careless with appearances. She plans things down to the font size, the thread count, the playlist tempo. Her world is curated, not rigid, but polished. Like those influencer kitchens where no sponge is ever out of place. She once told me, not unkindly, that she deleted old family photos because they didn't match the feed. I remember blinking at her, unsure if she was joking. Daniel had laughed like it was funny, but her face had stayed neutral. So, no, I didn't think it was an oversight. I kept waiting anyway. The following day, I stayed near the window longer than usual. I heard the postman's engine and found myself moving before I realized I'd stood up. Another grocery circular. A dentist appointment reminder. No invitation. Jessica had included Daniel's college roommate's girlfriend, someone she met. Twice she had invited her Pilates instructor. Even her wax lady. I wasn't on the list. I didn't cry. I didn't throw anything or call my son. I just went upstairs and reorganized the drawer where I kept my scarves. One of them, the pale lavender one with the small embroidered flowers, had been meant as part of her baby shower gift to wrap around the handmade booties I knitted weeks ago. They were soft, made of oat-colored wool, the same pattern my mother taught me when I was expecting Daniel. I had planned to tell her that story when she opened it, but there would be no opening. Not for me. Later that evening, I opened a boudoir. I opened a bottle of oil and rubbed it into my hands. The smell of rosemary rose like memory. My joints had been aching again, the knuckles especially. Age is funny that way. It creeps in like a draft, quiet and unnoticed, until something cold settles where warmth used to live. I looked at my reflection in the hallway mirror. I didn't look old, not in the way people say it. My hair was silvering at the temples, sure, but my eyes still held a shape of alertness, of memory. I wasn't irrelevant. But I was being treated that way, not with hostility, just omission. That's the crueler kind of harm, I think. Not when someone screams at you or slams a door, but when they quietly pretend you were never standing there to begin with. I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. Not even Elaine from next door, though she would have had a field day over it. There's something sacred about the first few days of disappointment. It's a kind of private ache you hold close to your chest like a cracked teacup. You know, it's broken, but it still fits in your hands, still holds a little warmth. I stayed silent. But I started noticing. I noticed that Jessica posted another update the next day, asking for nursery suggestions. Her mother's name was tagged. Mine wasn't. I noticed that the group chat I used to be in had become oddly quiet. Or maybe I had just stopped being part of it. And I noticed most of all how easy it was for her to carve me out of something. That hadn't even happened yet. There is no word for that kind of loneliness. It's not mourning, it's not betrayal, not exactly. It's the quiet knowing that you are being erased while you're still alive, still speaking, still trying. Place the booties back in the drawer. No need to rush. There was time, plenty of time. I remember the first time I met Jessica. It was a Sunday afternoon, the kind where the light hits the kitchen table. It's just right, and everything feels a little golden, a little softened by time. I had made lemon tea bread, the kind Daniel always liked growing up, even though it crumbled too easily and never looked as clean as the pictures in cookbooks. I wanted the house to smell warm, familiar, like something worth remembering. Jessica arrived, 10 minutes early, holding a bouquet of hydrangeas wrapped in brown paper. I thought that was sweet. Thoughtful. She wore a cream blouse with little buttons up the side, the kind you have to plan for. Her makeup was light, careful, but something about her presence felt rehearsed. Like a girl who had practiced in the mirror, she smiled a little too tightly and extended her hand before I could hug her. And then she said it. "It's so nice to meet you, ma'am." I remember the way Daniel's head turned, just slightly. He didn't correct her, didn't flinch, just placed a hand on her back and said, "She made your favorite." He meant the tea bread. I told myself it didn't matter, that maybe it was nerves. Maybe Jessica came from one of those households where formality meant respect. Or maybe it was just a slip something from a YouTube video about making a good impression. She was younger than him by a few years. She probably watched those. Still, it lodged somewhere. Not sharp, not painful, just. There we sat at the table and made polite conversation. She complimented the bread, said it tasted like something from a boutique cafe. I smiled, said thank you, and noticed the way she dabbed the corners of her mouth with a napkin after every sip of tea. Not delicate. Precise. Daniel was quiet for most of it, which surprised me. He usually filled silences with jokes or stories or some random fact about birds or jazz musicians, but that day he mostly watched, nodding here and there, eyes flicking between us like a moderator at a debate. At one point, I mentioned an old trip we took, just him and me, a little beach town where we got food poisoning from undercooked clams. T laughed. Jessica smiled but glanced at the clock. She said it sounded fun, in the kind of voice people use when they're being polite. That's when I first noticed it. The small space she kept between herself and the past. My past with him. She wasn't cruel. That's the part that makes it hard to explain. She wasn't unkind or dismissive. She asked questions, complimented the house, even admired the photo on the mantel, the one of Daniel in his high school band uniform, holding that ridiculous trombone. But she didn't lean in, not once. It was as if she was scanning, taking inventory of who I was, and quietly deciding which parts of me were allowed in. I tried, later, to brush it off, told myself I was reading into things. After all, I wanted, too, like her. I wanted someone to love Daniel the way he deserved. I wanted him to have softness, family, someone to stand with him when I eventually couldn't. That's the thought that caught me off guard. Quen, age has a way of slipping in through thoughts like that, doesn't it? In the weeks that followed, they came by a few more times. Always brief visits. Jessica brought things gluten-free muffins, a new kind of herbal tea she was excited about, even a little framed quote once. Home is a feeling, not a place. I remember reading it and thinking that sounded nice, if a bit empty. She always addressed me with a kind of distance. Not ma'am again, not after the first time, but never quite by name either. It was always phrased, "Would you like some?" Or, "Do you mind if I use the sink?" Avoiding directness in a way that felt oddly strategic. Daniel never said much about it. When I brought up little things, like how quiet she became when I told stories about his childhood, he just shrugged, said she was shy, said she wanted to make a good impression. I nodded. Let it go. Or at least tried. But now, years later, I replay that first visit differently. I see how even in the warmth of the house, with bread on the table and sunlight on her skin, Jessica kept her shoes pointed toward the door, polite, present, but never quite in the room. And Daniel, he didn't miss it. He just didn't want to choose. That's what I understand now. If you wanted two women to like each other without anyone asking too much, if You thought love was supposed to make everything blend? But love, I've learned, doesn't always melt tension. Sometimes it just smooths it over like frosting on a cake that's already cracked. It wasn't the man that hurt. Not really. It was the fact that I started to believe her. When she used it, it was always small things. Things you could explain away if you wanted to. Things that didn't scream, just whispered. And for a long time, I let the whispers pass. Thought maybe I was being sensitive. Thought maybe the ground only felt like it was shifting because I was the one standing still. The first time was the lavender soap. I'd brought it over one afternoon, handmade bars, wrapped in wax paper and tied with twine. Soft scent, not overpowering, the kind that lingered gently on your hands long after washing. Jessica had smiled when I handed them over, said something polite about how vintage it looked, then placed them on the windowsill by the sink. The next time I visited, they were gone, replaced by sleek, square bottles labeled citrus, musk, and coastal linen. Tina asked. Just washed my hands in silence, the water running warm over something sharp inside me. Later that week, she did a registry live stream. I clicked through out of curiosity more than anything. She had a polished setup ring, light, neutral background, perfectly stacked gift boxes. Her voice was bright, animated, and then I saw it. One of the shelves behind her, the one I had helped her organize last month, was now missing the small basket of baby blankets I had knit. 3 of them. Pale blue, muted green, and a soft oatmeal color. They weren't fancy, just hand-stitched. With quiet care. I remember sitting up late for days with the yarn resting against my knees, thinking about the weight of a newborn, how they curl like commas, how warmth is a language of its own. Now, the basket was gone, replaced by a wooden sign that said, "This nursery is Instagram ready." I watched the rest of the stream in silence. She rattled off product links, gestured to minimalist mobiles and hypoallergenic stuffed animals. Someone asked in the chat if the baby would have any heirlooms. Jessica laughed and said, "We're trying to keep everything clean and fresh. You know, nothing too old school." She didn't look at the camera when she said it, but somehow I still felt seen. Or unseen. I started paying closer attention after that. At family dinners, she'd tell stories that danced right past me. Retellings of trips or holidays where my presence was softened, trimmed, or erased entirely. Once, she talked about Daniel's graduation and how they'd celebrated afterward. With Thai food. I remember being there, sitting across from her, holding a fork I didn't need because everything came with chopsticks. But in Jessica's version, it had been just the two of them. "Just us," she said with a little laugh. Her hand on Daniel's arm. When I brought it up afterward, gently, not accusingly, she smiled and said, "Oh, I must have just remembered it wrong. So many things have happened since then." Wasn't a correction. It was a quiet rewriting. It's the kind of thing that makes you question your own memory. And Daniel? He didn't correct her either. Sometimes I think people don't have to lie to make you feel invisible. They just have to stop mentioning you. Stop including your name in stories. Stop placing your things where they can be seen. Slowly, you begin to disappear, not all at once, but in careful inches. That's how it felt. Like I was becoming wallpaper in my own family. Present, but decorative. Always there, but never really in the room. I started noticing how the chair I used to sit in was now occupied by a faux fiddle leaf fig. How my casseroles were praised for being comforting, but never quite touched. How my voice would trail off during a story because someone else, usually Jessica, had already started talking over me. It wasn't malicious. That's what made it hard. It was curated. Tidy. Jessica had a vision, and I didn't fit inside it. I tried for a while to adapt. I wore more beige when visiting, brought hand soaps and soft packaging, told shorter stories, fewer memories, but it didn't help. The more I softened, the more I faded. One evening, I stood by the nursery door while she showed a guest the room. She pointed out the new rocking chair, the custom print above the crib, the floating shelves Daniel had installed. I was just behind her, Close enough to smell her perfume. Close enough to see the baby blanket folded at the edge of the crib, not mine. She didn't acknowledge me, not in the tour, not in the room. I nodded to myself, a quiet thing, like agreeing with a thought I hadn't said aloud. Some things don't need confrontation. Some truths don't shout. They just settle around you like dust, and you either learn to breathe through them, or you open a window. It was one of those evenings when the air felt thick with quiet. The sky hadn't quite darkened, and a pale gold washed over the tops of trees, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. I had made lentil stew that morning, the same recipe my mother used when I was pregnant with Daniel. It smelled like something rooted, something soft and earthy. I let it simmer all afternoon, the house gently filled with cumin and garlic, and that slow, familiar rhythm of something made by hand. I hadn't told them I was coming early. I thought it would be a small surprise, not the kind that startles, just the kind that quietly says, "I'm thinking of you." When I reached their front door, I balanced the warm container in one hand and adjusted my scarf with the other. The porch light hadn't come on yet. The house looked warm from the outside, soft-lit, windows glowing like pages of a book left open too long. I was just about to knock when I heard Jessica's voice. Not loud, not sharp. It's just a thread of sound, light and unguarded. She was saying something to someone, probably Daniel, though I couldn't hear his part. Her words came in fragments, carried through the thin crack of the front window. "She's sweet, but too old-fashioned. I just don't want her throwing off the vibe." There was a pause, silence that felt like it had shape. "She means well, but it's all so, cozy, knitted things. Smells like a church basement sometimes." Laughed, but softly, not cruel, not mocking. More like the way people laugh when they're trying to make a point sound smaller than it is. It's like brushing something off their sleeve. I didn't move. I didn't knock. I stood there for a few seconds more, my hand tightening around the container, the warmth seeping slowly into my palm. I wasn't angry. That's the strange part. Anger would have given the moment teeth, made it something to push back against, but what I felt was flatter. Quiet, it was the casualness that stung. The ease with which she named me outdated. Not to my face, not in a fight, but in a tone reserved for tablecloths that didn't match or songs that were just a little off-key. I stepped back, just slightly, and pretended to fuss with my scarf. Gave her voice enough time to trail off. Then I knocked, light and rhythmic, as if I had just arrived. Jessica opened the door, smiling with practiced brightness. Her eyes flicked down to the container in my hands. "That smells amazing," she said, reaching out. "You really didn't have to." I smiled back, told her it was nothing, that it was just something warm for a cool evening. She took it and disappeared into the kitchen while I slipped off my shoes and stepped inside. Daniel gave me a brief hug, his arm resting lightly on my back. He looked tired, or maybe just preoccupied. The baby monitor buzzed faintly on the counter, and a pile of unopened packages sat near the hallway, still wrapped in brown cardboard. We sat, we ate. They complimented the stew. Jessica asked about the ingredients, said something about trying to eat more plant-based meals. The whole evening passed without friction, smooth like a stone turned over too many times. But something inside me had shifted. It's one thing to suspect you've become unnecessary. It's another to hear it phrased like a design flaw. Later, at home, I rinsed the duplicate container I'd kept for myself. The kitchen was quiet, the walls holding in the scent of spices and something older memory, perhaps. I stood by the sink and looked at my reflection in the window pane, blurred by steam. Too old-fashioned. I rolled the phrase around in my mind like a loose tooth. I tried to picture what she meant. The crocheted blankets, the way I still use real butter, the habit of bringing food instead of flowers. I wasn't upset that she didn't like it. I was unsettled by how easily I'd been reduced to it. There was a time when I believed effort, Was enough that showing up with something homemade meant something. That being sweet, even if a little traditional, it's a kind of currency that still held value in a family. But that night, I understood something different. To Jessica, I wasn't cruel or difficult or in the way. I was just out of frame, not part of the picture she was trying to take, and that somehow felt colder than anything else. I turned off the lights one by one, moving through the house slowly, letting silence return like fog on a field. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. Just folded the empty dish towel in half and placed it gently on the counter. Some things, once overheard, don't need to be addressed. They just settle into the walls. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I saw the photos. I wasn't looking for them. I had opened Facebook to check the community garden updates. They were planting lavender near the back fence this season, and I'd offered to donate a few clay pots. But there it was, right at the top of my feed. Daniel had posted an entire album, Baby Bloom, A Day to Remember. The cover photo was of Jessica, glowing and poised, surrounded by soft pink balloons and those oversized tissue paper flowers that always look like they belong in a department store window. She stood beneath an arch of eucalyptus leaves, a hand on her belly, the other holding a mocktail. Her dress was pale mauve sheer at the sleeves, and her smile, frozen by the shutter, looked effortless. I clicked through, even though something in my chest tightened with each tap. There were group shots on picnic blankets, little chalkboard, signs that said, guess the due date and wishes for baby. Long tables covered in pastel cakes and gold-rimmed glasses. People I didn't recognize, mostly her friends, her yoga circle, her mother's bridge club, a woman I once met briefly at a holiday party who, if I remember right, sold organic skincare from her phone. But not me, not even in the background. I stared longer than I should have, looking for some sign. A photo cut off at the edge, a blurry. Figure that might have been me. A name tag, a seat left empty. Nothing. No mention. No wish you could have been there. No acknowledgement that something, someone, had been absent. I scrolled down to the comments. People gushed, said it looked magical, dreamy, that Jessica had outdone herself. I counted the likes not because they mattered, but because I needed something to do with my hands. After a while, I sent Daniel a message. Soft, measured. The shower looked lovely. I hope it all went well, he replied with a thumbs up. 2 minutes later, a second message. Oh, Jess thought it'd be more relaxing without too many people. That was all. No apology. No follow-up. No space to be hurt. Just too many people. And with that, I became too much. I sat for a while, phone resting on the arm of the chair, the screen dimming every few seconds before fading entirely. The room around me stayed still. The shadows from the late afternoon sun stretched across the floor like fingers that didn't know where to land. I didn't cry. I went to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and drank it slowly, as if that might press something back down. There was a time when Daniel would have called, when he would have noticed if I was too quiet on the other end of the line. It's a time when he would have come to me with questions: how to hold a newborn, how to fix the drawer that sticks, how to know if the crib was assembled right. But now, I was someone to be considered later, if at all. I thought back to the booties in my drawer, the oatmeal-colored ones I had knit on slow mornings. I'd imagined them at the shower, tucked inside a basket with ribbon. A little card that said, "From Grandma." I had even rehearsed what I'd say if someone asked about them now. I couldn't picture them without feeling foolish. I wanted to believe that Daniel didn't mean harm, that he was just trying to keep the peace, that Jessica had drawn a line and he, unsure of how to step over it, simply stayed behind. But even peace, when chosen over truth, begins to feel like silence. And silence, when held too long, begins to feel like distance. That night, I didn't look at the album again. I tucked the phone away, pulled a blanket over my lap, and let the television flicker without sound. I watched shadows move across the wall, shifting like thoughts too quiet to speak aloud. I wasn't angry. Not in the way people expect. I didn't want a confrontation or some big explanation. I just wanted to be seen. But even that seemed was too much. We had dinner weeks later. Jessica had invited me over, a kind of make-good meal after the baby shower, though it hadn't been phrased that way. Just a casual text about a quiet evening, pasta, maybe a bottle of wine. I didn't expect much. Not after the photos, but I said yes. Out of habit. Out of hope, maybe. When I arrived, Marcy was already there. Jessica's younger sister. I hadn't seen her in over a year. She looked the same. Hair half up, cardigan falling off one shoulder. Laughed just a little too loud for a room that size. There was something comforting about her disarray. It's like a window that never quite shuts, but lets in the kind of breeze you don't mind. The table was set nicely. Cloth napkins folded in that triangular way Jessica liked. A sprig of rosemary tucked into each one like we were eating at a wedding. Candles flickered low along the center. The kind of meal meant to be photographed before it was tasted. Jessica handed out glasses of something dry and white, and we all sat, the chairs scraping. Quietly on the floor, the pasta was served in wide bowls, creamy, with sun-dried tomatoes and little flecks of basil floating on top. Conversation drifted from the baby's movements to nursery. Wallpaper to Marcy's new freelance gig. I stayed quiet for most of it, answering when asked, smiling where it felt appropriate. At some point, I mentioned a tea my mother used to make fennel and cardamom. Said it helped me sleep during pregnancy. Said it was something my grandmother swore by. Jessica laughed lightly and said, "Let's try to keep it modern, okay?" She passed the wine bottle to Daniel without looking at me. "We're not doing any old wives' tales around the baby." Her tone was even not cruel, just corrective. I nodded, took a sip of water. The rim of the glass felt cold against my lip. Something in me tilted, like a painting nudged slightly off the nail still hanging, still upright, but no longer straight. Marcy glanced at me from across the table. She wasn't smiling. Her fork paused midair, then slowly lowered to the edge of her plate. She looked between us, Jessica and me, and blinked once, like someone trying to recalibrate a scene. The conversation moved on. Daniel asked about pediatricians. Jessica mentioned a sleep training book someone had gifted her. Marcy cracked a joke about never sleeping again. Everyone laughed. I folded my napkin into smaller and smaller squares beneath the table. The rest of the evening passed gently. A thin kind of peace, the kind that covers rather than settles. I helped clear the plates afterward, careful not to clink them too loudly. Jessica thanked me for coming. Her voice was warm but distant, like a pre-recorded message you hear on the phone. Daniel hugged me at the door, quick, distracted. He smelled faintly of garlic and cologne. I told him to get some rest. Jessica smiled, one hand already on the doorknob. I walked to my car with the night air pressing gently against my skin. A cat darted across the street. Somewhere nearby, someone's wind chime caught the soft breeze and trembled. At home. I made myself a cup of that same fennel tea, sat at the kitchen table and let the steam curl around my fingers. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that doesn't need to be broken. I didn't feel angry, just repositioned. Later that night, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown. "Number Bud." I recognized the tone before I saw the name. "Marcy, that wasn't right." 3 words. Okay. No punctuation. No explanation. But they landed like weight on the other side of a scale. I didn't realize I was still balancing. I stared at the screen for a long time, didn't reply. Just let it sit there, glowing faintly in the dark. It wasn't a rescue. Not really. But it was the first time anyone had said it out loud. And somehow, that was enough. It came as a surprise, a quiet ping from a name I hadn't thought of in some time. Adam. Marcy's ex. I stared at the message for a moment, unsure if it was meant for me. He'd found me through an old comment on one of Daniel's posts. Said he hoped it wasn't strange reaching out, just that he'd heard I wasn't invited to the baby shower and wanted to check in. I read it twice. He said he missed the family dinners. The ones where we crammed around my old oak table. Marcy, barefoot even in winter. Politely declining seconds, and Adam always lingering to help with the dishes. He said he still remembered the stew I used to make. It's the spicy one with cinnamon and cloves. It's the kind you feel first in the nose before it settles into your chest. And then he wrote something simple, something that settled over me like a soft weight. Marcy, always said you made the place feel like home. Wasn't a grand message, no dramatic gestures. Just a handful of words that remembered me as I was, not curated, not edited out, not too much or too old-fashioned. Just present. I laughed, gently. It was the first time in weeks I'd let myself. Not because of Adam, not exactly. But because someone had seen me clearly enough to remember something real. I typed slowly, unsure how much to say. Told him thank you, that it meant more than he knew. Asked how he was doing. We exchanged a few more messages over the next couple of days. Nothing romantic, nothing charged. Just the kind of conversations that feel like sliding into a warm coat you'd forgotten still fit. He asked about the garden. Kai asked about his work. We talked about soups, oddly enough. Kai said no one makes lentil stew the way I do. There was something grounding in it, not the attention, but the recognition. The soft reminder that I had existed before all of this. Before Jessica's registry live streams, before the group photos I wasn't in. Before I became the afterthought in my own family's gatherings, Adam wasn't family anymore. Not by any technical means. But he still held pieces of it in his memory. Versions of us that hadn't been sanitized or smoothed over. I found myself remembering the time he helped replant my backyard azaleas after a spring storm. The way he'd knelt in the dirt without hesitation, jeans stained, hands full of roots, asking me if they needed more shade or more sun. He wasn't flashy, Adam. He didn't perform kindness. He just did things. Quiet, sure things it struck me how rare that had become. That week, I sat down and rewrote the stew recipe from memory. Added little notes in the margins, when to stir, when not to, rush the simmer. I scanned a copy and sent it to him. He replied with a photo 2 nights later, a slightly burned pot, a sheepish caption, too much cumin. I smiled. Not because it was perfect, but because someone somewhere was trying to recreate something I had made. Not replace it, not rename it, just remember it. I didn't tell Daniel. Didn't think he'd understand. Or maybe I didn't want to hear that same silence again, the one that always followed whenever I brought up something inconvenient to Jessica's world. But something in me softened, just slightly. Like a drawer that had been stuck finally sliding open again. Sometimes all it takes is one person remembering you the way you actually were, not the way others decided you should be. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I wasn't fading. I heard it through someone else. The way news often travels when you're no longer seated at the table but still hovering somewhere just beyond the doorframe. Jessica was upset. That much was clear. Not openly. She was never loud about her disappointments, but in the way she moved. Clipped and cold, as if a drawer wouldn't close right, apparently. Marcy and Adam had seen each other again, quietly. Nothing dramatic. Just coffee, then a long walk around the lake where the ducks cluster near the bridge and the wind always carries a bit of pond on its breath. My name came up. More than once, I was told. I don't know what was said exactly, only that it wasn't bitter. Marcy had mentioned the stew again, the way I used to press herbs into her palms and tell her what each one meant. Adam had remembered the blanket I gave him that winter gray, with navy edges soft from too many washes, full of threads. That unraveled if you didn't pay attention. Jessica didn't like it. Maybe she thought Marcy was supposed to stay neutral. Or maybe she didn't like that the parts of me she had worked so hard to edit out had found new breath in the spaces she couldn't quite control. The message came 2 days after the baby was born. Single line, short and almost careless. You can come now if you want. No photo, no baby name. Just that dot, not even a period at the end. I stared at it for a while, the screen cool in my hand, the glow casting long lines across my kitchen counter. The words hung in the air like a scent I didn't recognize, not sweet, not sharp, just faintly unfamiliar. I didn't reply, not out of anger, not even hurt, really. That had come and gone, weathered down into something softer. What I felt instead was quiet clarity. By then, I had already chosen my moment. A few days before, I'd stopped by Marcy's with a tin of cookies. No occasion, just a visit. She'd lit candles that smelled like sandalwood and opened a window to let the breeze cut through the warm air. Adam was there. He greeted me without hesitation, like I was. Expected. We sat on the couch and talked. About nothing, really. The strange heat for April, the birds nesting in the eaves, how the lavender I'd given her last summer had finally bloomed. And then, in a pause between subjects, I told them both, without drama or ceremony, that I'd like them to have the blessing I'd once folded away for someone else. No long speech. Just a nod, a smile, a quiet offering. I gave it not as a reward, not out of spite, but as a kind of release. Oh, a way of saying, you remembered me. It's how I remember you. Jessica's message sat unread for days. I watched as it slipped lower in the thread, replaced by weather alerts, store receipts, group texts about a neighbor's lost cat. I didn't feel triumphant. That wasn't the point. I simply didn't feel erased anymore. There is a kind of peace that comes when you stop knocking on doors that remain closed. When you choose to plant your own garden instead of waiting for someone else to invite you into. There's dot in the days that followed. I baked more. Things I hadn't made in years, cinnamon bread, plum jam, a stew so spicy it made my eyes water. I wrapped one of the baby blankets and sent it to Marcy. No card. Just folded neatly with ribbon. I didn't know what would come of it all, whether Adam and Marcy would find their way back for good or if it was just a passing season. But that wasn't mine to hold. I had already given what I needed to Doc Jessica. Would carry on with her soft neutrals and curated life. With her posts and polished dinners and rooms that smelled like eucalyptus and silence. And me. I would carry on too, not bitter, just full. Full of memory and time and the quiet knowing that I had chosen my own place at the table, no longer waiting, no longer asking, just there. Where I'd always been, seen by those who chose to look. I never showed up to the baby's first birthday. There had been an invitation. This time, a digital card that arrived in my inbox with pastel balloons and calligraphy that read "Our sweet one turns one." It was polite, well-designed, no doubt made with one of those online templates that lets you choose just the right shade of dusty pink. My name was spelled correctly. The RSVP was optional. I let it sit unopened for a while, hovered over it, then moved it gently into the archive folder without clicking. I already knew. I wouldn't go. The party photos came later, Jessica holding the baby in a ruffled dress. Daniel somewhere behind her, one hand on the high chair. Everything looked picture-perfect, color-coordinated cupcakes. A wooden name plaque hung delicately against a backdrop of silk streamers. Even the balloon garland had symmetry. I didn't feel left out this time. I felt, still, some things you stop waiting for. Not out of bitterness, but out of quiet understanding. That your presence is no longer needed in the way you once hoped it would be. That your offerings, soft woolen things, stories too long for modern. Attention spans have no place on curated gift tables. I didn't send anything for the baby instead. I sent something to Marcy. A framed photo, faded at the edges, taken at a picnic years ago. Marcy and Adam sitting on a blanket near the water. Heads tilted toward each other in that unintentional way that happens when people are still learning how to love. She had grape juice on her shirt. He had grass in his hair. Wasn't glamorous. But it was real. I wrapped it in plain brown paper and tied it with string. No note, just the photo, returned to its rightful hands. Marcy texted later that evening. Said thank you. Said she'd forgotten that day until the moment she saw it again. Said it made her laugh out loud. That's all she said. But it was enough. Jessica wouldn't have understood. She might have thought I was trying to make a statement. Or worse, being petty. She liked clarity. Preferred things with edges and labels. I've come to learn that not everyone knows what to do with silence. But I wasn't trying to explain myself anymore. Some blessings don't come with applause. They don't arrive in grand gestures or tearful reconciliations. They come softly in the form of a photo returned, a recipe passed down, a baby blanket folded away for someone who might understand what it means to keep something warm simply. Because you can. They come like that, slow, burning, steady. I spent the afternoon of the party in the garden. Pulled weeds with bare hands, the dirt packing under my nails. Trimmed the rosemary bush near the fence. Lit a candle near the kitchen sink, the one that smells faintly of clove and citrus. The radio played something soft. I let the window stay open even as the light began to cool. No one called. And that was fine because I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for an invitation. Not for a seat at a table I no longer recognized. Instead, I carved out a space of my own. Small, maybe, but wide enough for memory, for stillness. It's for the kind of love that doesn't announce itself, doesn't perform it. Just is like steam rising from stew on a cold night. Like laughter echoing in a hallway long after the door has closed. Like a light that doesn't flicker, just glows, without permission. Without fanfare. And for the first time in a very long while, that was enough.